Welcome to the ninth episode of our show, Pakistan, a hard country, where we delve into the complex realities of Pakistan through the lens of Anatol Lieven's thought-provoking book.
Great to be diving in again.
Today we're undertaking a deep dive into the 8th chapter, Sindh, specifically exploring pages 270 through 301.
Yep, focusing right in on Sindh.
Our mission, to really understand the unique heartbeat of this Pakistani province, its society, and how it fits into the bigger picture of the nation, all through Lieven's insightful lens.
It's a fascinating province, definitely worth the focus.
So let's dive right into his initial impressions of Sindh. What struck him right away?
Well, what's really interesting from the get-go is how Lieven emphasizes this palpable, really deep-rooted Sindhi identity. He sees it as quite distinct, different from other regional feelings in Pakistan.
And it's not a new thing, he says.
Not at all. He traces it back, the roots of Sindhi nationalism, way before Pakistan was even created.
Right, he talks about G.M. Syed clashing with Jinnah, and then that Sindhi Nationalist Party forming. That really sets the context, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows these weren't dynamics that just appeared overnight. They have history.
A history of friction, it seems. Lieven mentions those local terms.
Yeah, those are quite something. The Sindhis calling Muhajirs makar.
Which means locusts.
Locusts, exactly. And then the Muhajirs firing back with pendu or chupaya for Sindhis.
Villager or four-legged?
Yeah, it's pretty raw language. You see a real snapshot of that initial tension, those early divides.
Definitely paints a picture. Okay, so moving within Sindh.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to talk about Karachi. Lieven presents it as this, well, almost a world unto itself within the province.
Oh, absolutely. Its growth, particularly after partition, was just explosive.
Right, the huge influx of people.
Huge. And its economic weight is enormous. Lieven points out it generates something like a quarter of Pakistan's state revenues and GDP.
Wow. That alone creates a unique dynamic.
For sure. An economic engine like that is bound to have its own set of pressures and complexities.
And that leads into the ethnic mix, which Lieven details quite carefully. It sounds like a real competition zone.
Very much so. He describes this intense competition for resources, for influence, among the main groups Sindhis, Muhajirs, Pashtuns, Baloch.
And the MQM emerges from this.
Exactly. The Muhajir Qawmi movement, formed in '84, Lieven presents it as a direct response, a political voice, specifically for those Urdu-speaking migrants.
But the MQM itself, as Lieven describes it, is full of contradictions, almost paradoxical.
That's a good way to put it. On one hand, you have a movement associated with, intermittent violence and clashes.
With other groups?
Yes, with other ethnic groups, and also significantly clashes with the state itself at various points.
But on the other hand?
On the other hand, Lieven points out how the MQM has been repeatedly kind of co-opted by the state, pulled into the system through patronage, through deals.
And they even dropped their demand for a separate Karachi province eventually.
They did. Which really highlights that complex dance, between pushing against the system and finding ways to work within it, or perhaps being absorbed by it. It makes you think about power.
And then there's the figure of Altaf Hussain, leading from London. Lieven has this interesting contrast between his appeal and Benazir Bhutto's.
Yeah, that's fascinating. He calls Hussein's appeal the charisma of the ordinary.
Ordinary. How so?
Like, he connected with the lower middle class Muhajirs because he seemed like one of them, just elevated, someone they could relate to directly.
Compared to Bhutto.
Compared to Bhutto's image, which Lieven frames as the great princess. Very different styles, appealing to different bases of support and identity.
Lieven also mentioned something a bit darker, this atmosphere of fear around criticizing the MQM in Karachi. Self-censorship among media analysts.
Yes, he does touch on that. It suggests a pretty significant level of influence and control and raises real questions about, how freely people felt they could speak about the group and its actions.
But interestingly, it wasn't all just politics and control. Lieven also gives the MQM credit for some tangible things in Karachi.
He does. And this adds another layer. According to Lieven, independent observers acknowledged their work on infrastructure.
Like that specifically.
Roads, flyovers, sewage systems, parks, basic city administration stuff. Apparently, they had a reputation for being quite efficient in getting those things done.
So a complex picture, not just one thing.
Definitely not. Which kind of extends to their broader political stances, too. Lieven contrasts their approach to, say, peace deals with the Taliban with the ANP's view.
Right, the Awami National Party. What was the tension there?
Well, the MQM was quite wary, warning about Taliban influence growing among Karachi's Pashtun population.
Okay.
While the AMP, representing many Pashtuns, strongly pushed back against that narrative, sometimes accusing the MQM of stirring up ethnic tensions.
So deep-seated anxieties playing out.
Exactly. Competing views on security, identity, all tangled up in Karachi's ethnic politics.
Lieven even described how you can almost see these divisions physically in the city.
Yeah, with the flags, right?
Yeah.
Different party flags dominating different neighborhoods, like marking territory.
He gives the example of Zarina Colony.
Yeah, Zarina Colony, where you see this mix of urban and rural life, and ANP flags still visible even after rangers tried to clear them. It's very visual.
And he briefly mentions the ANP leader there, Syed Shahi.
Right, describes him as the self-made businessman, a community leader, and his office. Lieven says it looked like something from a gangster movie set, adds a bit of color.
He also brings in the Unar family as an example from Sindh, known for generosity, loyalty.
Yes, and contrasts them sharply with the local police and their reliance on encounter specialists.
Extrajudicial killings, basically.
Pretty much. And that contrast really tells you something about law and order, doesn't it?
How so?
It highlights this situation where you have traditional social structures, reputation, operating alongside the formal state. And the fact that police resort to encounters suggests maybe the formal justice system isn't trusted or isn't working effectively, leading to these, well, brutal shortcuts.
Okay, let's shift our focus now. We've talked Karachi, but what about rural Sindh? Lieven paints a very different picture there.
Oh, it's a stark contrast. You move away from the city and suddenly it's all about tribal structures and the power of feudal landowners.
He uses that boar hunt he attended with Sardar Mumtaz Ali Bhutto as a kind of illustration.
Yes, a really vivid one. It demonstrates the hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
Sardar at the top, everyone else in their place.
But he also mentions that contrast between the well-fed hunting dogs and the ragged beaters.
Exactly. That detail speaks volumes about the inequality. And then the hunt itself descends into chaos when the boar escapes.
What did you take from that chaos part?
Well, it's a powerful image. Maybe it suggests that even within these rigid hierarchies, there's an underlying unpredictability, that control isn't absolute.
Interesting. And the Sardar holding court at his home, people
Oh.
coming for judgments.
Yeah, Lieven describes that too. It really shows the enduring power of these traditional authority figures. They're operating almost like a parallel system to the state's courts.
A state within a state, kinda.
In some ways, yes. And the details, Lieven notes the silver chair, the family tree, showing only men, they all reinforce that image of traditional patriarchal power.
He also digs into the influence of the big landowning families, the Wadaros.
Right, these powerful, often hereditary landowners. And particularly in southern Sindh, he notes the strong influence of Balak tribal ancestry.
How does that shape things?
Well, it's interesting. Their allegiance often goes to specific Sufi saints, and the areas where these saints are followed often map onto historical Balak tribal migrations.
So religion and tribal identity are deeply intertwined.
Very much so. It's not just about land, it's about these long-standing cultural, spiritual, and tribal connections that shape loyalties.
Lieven also draws a distinction between Balak and Pashtun tribalism. Why is that important?
It's key to understanding different dynamics across Pakistan. He points out Balak leadership tends to be hereditary hierarchical power passed down,
Okay.
whereas Pashtun tribal structures are often described as more, well, meritocratic or democratic, in the sense that leaders often emerge through consensus or achievement.
And he mentions the turbaning ceremony for a new Balak Sardar.
Yes, as a symbol of that inherited authority. It's a very formal passing down of the leadership role.
He also addresses a really difficult topic, honor killings, Karokari, among Balak tribesmen in Sindh.
Yes, he doesn't shy away from it. It's a stark reminder of the extreme patriarchal codes in some of these communities.
Focused on female purity.
An extreme obsession with it, leading to tragic consequences, often based on mere suspicion. It highlights the constraints and dangers faced, particularly by women.
And when disputes happen in the countryside, Lieven talks about jirgas, the traditional councils.
Right, they act as a dispute resolution mechanism.
But he adds a caveat, doesn't he? about how their decisions are enforced.
He does. He suggests that ultimately the decisions often rely on the backing of physical force or the threat of it.
Reports do.
It points to the weakness of the formal state's legal system in really penetrating these areas effectively. Justice becomes localized and sometimes reliant on power dynamics.
He includes that anecdote about the young Sardar.
Oh, yeah, the one who refuses to give girls in compensation for a dispute, which used to be common, but still punishes elopements by putting pressure on the families involved.
Shows the complexity. It's not a simple system.
Not at all. It illustrates how traditional justice adapts, but still operates within its own, sometimes arbitrary, logic.
And this idea that a tribesman from a powerful tribe can walk around unarmed while others can't.
That really says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It underscores the inequality of security and the limitations of the state's ability to provide equal protection under the law.
So there's this constant blend, or maybe tension, between state law, Sharia, and local community law.
Exactly. Lieven emphasizes this fluid movement between them. And factors like corruption, intimidation, even just shared cultural views within the police, they all influence which system prevails in any given situation. It's messy.
Okay, one more key element Lieven explores is Sufism in Sindh, especially the shrine of Sewan Sharif. Why focus there?
Sewan Sharif is hugely important. Its roots go incredibly deep. Lieven notes connections even to pre-Islamic Hindu river worship legends.
Really?
Yeah, which highlights the syncretism, the blending of traditions that's so characteristic of Sindhi culture.
And the main saint there, Lal Shahbaz Qalandar.
He was originally from Persia, connected to other major Sindhi saints like Shah Abdul Latif. It speaks to the rich, long history of Sufism in the region.
It's not just religious, though. Lieven mentions political figures making donations.
Right, like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. These shrines often become significant centers of social and political influence, too. They attract patronage, they hold sway.
Soft power.
A lot of soft power, yes.
And the atmosphere Lieven describes. The drumming, dancing.
It sounds incredibly vibrant. He describes the drumming, the ecstatic dancing, the separate area for women not screened off, but separate.
And he noticed different styles of worship among the women.
Yeah, he contrasts the sort of decorous chanting of most women with the more visibly ecstatic, perhaps trance-like movements of others. It captures the range of expression within that Sufi practice.
It really shows that blend of Islamic mysticism with local traditions.
Absolutely. That's a key theme for Sindh in Lieven's account.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together. After this deep dive into Lieven's chapter on Sindh, what are the main takeaways? It feels like a land of strong contrasts.
Definitely. What emerges is a province with this incredibly deep-rooted sense of its own identity.
Right.
An identity shaped by history, by migration, by sometimes fierce ethnic competition.
Especially in Karachi.
Especially in Karachi.
Yeah.
But also shaped by these enduring tribal structures in the rural areas and overlaid with this vibrant, pervasive Sufi tradition.
And Karachi itself is almost a case study within the case study.
You could say that. It's this, like, pressure cooker of rapid urbanization. You see the challenges of different groups living side by side, the potential, but also the deep divisions and violence that can flare up.
And then you contrast that urban dynamic with rural Sindh,
where traditional power, the Waderos, the Sardars, the Jirgas, still hold so much sway, often operating in parallel or even instead of the formal state. It shows how multi-layered power and justice are in Pakistan.
So for you, the listener, grappling with Sindh through Lieven's perspective really gives you a window into Pakistan's broader challenges, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's about managing these diverse, strong identities. It's about balancing modernization with tradition.
Finding ways to govern effectively.
Exactly. Establishing governance and justice that actually works for everyone, from the megacity of Karachi to the smallest rural village. That interplay we've discussed between the urban and the rural within Sindh, it's crucial for understanding the whole country.
It really is a hard country in that sense, full of these complexities.
Yeah. Which leads to a final thought, perhaps. Something for you to consider.
Go on.
Given these really strong, historically deep regional identities like we see so clearly in Sindh, how effectively can a centralized state model truly meet the very diverse, often very localized needs and aspirations of all its people in the long run?
That's a big question. Definitely something to mull over.